and Libya at 2017 production levels without deciding on the figures. The oil cartel also agreed to extend oil output cuts until the end of 2018 as part of the global efforts to eliminate excess oil supply in the international market. Nigeria, Africa's biggest oil producer, and Libya had previously been exempted from the cuts due to unrest in both countries and lower than normal production. The decision to extend the production cuts saw crude oil prices rising, with the global benchmark, Brent, trading near a 2.5-year high above $64 per barrel. The current deal, under which OPEC and non-OPEC producers are cutting supply by about 1.8 million barrels per day in an effort to boost oil prices, expires in March 2018. Well, let's discuss this latest, especially the cap on Libya and Nigeria crude production. Energy analyst Bala Zakka is in the studio. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Yes, just day before yesterday, we talked about the possibility, the debate that there may be a cap on Nigeria's production.
Correct.
And so with Libya. Now it has been done. There is a cap, but they didn't specify how much they should be able to produce. And the Minister of Petroleum, that's Ibe Kachiku, has been harping on the word cap and not cut. It says he has been agreeing, or he has agreed, or for a long time had accepted that it should be capped, and is comfortable with that. But what's the difference between cut and cap?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's basically semantics, because we were made to understand that within the OPEC theme and within the discussion also, they were advised to be disciplined, you know, based on the revenues that come to them. But generally, it's very good, because it needs to make them to look inwards. And like we said before, the reasons why they were giving that concession was just because they experienced different business climate hostilities and disruptions within their own country. But that does not mean, as OPEC and the other friends of OPEC, they wouldn't want to make sure they have global effect on the prices of crude oil. And like we have always said, the interest of the general cartel is what everybody should lean towards. But for us as Nigeria, you know, there are implications. But before we discuss the implications, we need to have it at the back of our minds that when they were asked to be a bit disciplined, when they were given that concession, they needed to have it at the back of their minds that, first of all, when you talk about that God-given crude oil or endowment, nobody did anything special to have it there. It basically domiciled itself there based on the activities of nature and the interplay of geological tectonics and activities. So what countries needed to do was to use the minimum cost and safety measures and make sure they bring those resources to the surface. And when they do that, it will help them now to develop their human capitals, develop education, develop, you know, health, and even become exporters of those and use that to diversify their economy. I know
you talked about implications, but just before that, you also talked about discipline. Do you think Nigeria, Libya can be disciplined not to flood the market with this?
We will expect them to be disciplined, whichever way you look at it, because you're talking about the general interest of the cartel now. Because if they don't listen to the cartel and things go out of way, then they will suffer for it. Because as we speak now, they are suffering from technical, security, and financial constraints in managing their respective countries and in their production. And remember, there are some non-OPEC countries that are bent towards destroying or breaking the back of that cartel.
All right.
So let's not also forget that there are some countries that have what we call low mobility ratio crude oil, or heavy crude oil, or difficult crude oil to bring out. So if the cost per barrel becomes relatively cheap for them, or if the price of crude oil goes above a given level, then it will become cost effective for them to produce. And in that process, they will glut the global market and make sure things go bad. And Nigeria will suffer for it.
Nigeria would suffer for it. Let's look at the implication of this cap now. Many are already worried that this could threaten the increase in oil revenue in 2018.
Yes, there are direct practical implications as far as Nigeria is concerned. Because just before now, when the presentation was made of the 2018 budget or appropriation bill, first of all, when we say a budget simply means future plans in monetary terms. You are planning for 2018, but in monetary terms. And remember, we came up with our expected revenue from crude oil will be about $2.44 trillion, while non-oil will be about 4.17 trillion. Then, as far as deficit will be concerned, we had that at about 2 trillion. So what is happening now is this. Our expected production to be able to meet up with the Nigerian revenue generation should have been, or is supposed to be 2.3 million barrels per day. Now that it has been capped to 1.8, that means there will be a differential of 500.
Great.
So when you multiply that with the expected revenue, which is $45 per barrel, and you multiply that by about 365 days, that means we will have a shortfall of about $500 billion. And that $500 billion ordinarily is supposed to, on the side of expenditure, now is supposed to help us to take care of statutory transfers of almost 456. And even the sinking fund we were expecting of about 22 billion. So what we are now going to be left with to play around with is to take care of our debt servicing, which is almost 2 trillion. And that is almost equivalent to our deficit. Then we will now be having a capital expenditure of 2.43 trillion and a now recurrent expenditure, which is different from interest expenditure, because interest expenditure is the debt servicing. Non-interest expenditure is the general recurrent expenditure of about 3.49. So the implication practically for Nigeria is we are likely to have a shortfall or an additional deficit of $500 billion.
Well, it is huge, but it seemed President Muhammadu Buhari saw the danger signals ahead when he benchmarked it on $45 a barrel.
Correct.
As against what the senators or the lawmakers actually want. They were asking for $50 per barrel. But looking at the market, which is yet to stabilize, what would you have thought?
Well, I'm not expecting us to go above that 45, because one thing is this: I have always believed in planning and saving for the rainy days. So even though the price potentially is hovering around $60 per barrel, let's not forget that there will always be what we call disruptions and cyclical shocks. And depending on what will happen next year, or if it becomes continuously attractive to the shale oil producers and they glut the market, we can go down to as low as $30 per barrel.
I was going to talk about that, the dangers of the shale production, but let's talk about that after the break. You're watching Business Tonight. We'll return shortly. Nigeria, Libya have been removed from that exemption that OPEC actually gave them earlier. Now they've been asked to cap output production. I've been speaking with energy analyst Bala, Zakka. Yes, there's been the fear. I know that has been the fear with Russia, that the U.S. shale production could outshadow what we have on ground.
Really, you see, when you talk about the oil and gas industry, you are talking about an energy global system where you also have what we call superpowers having indirect clashes. There is what we call technical implications, economic, commercial, operational, and political implications. What Russia is talking about now is more of political implication that will end up becoming negatively dangerous for the OPEC countries and the non-OPEC countries that are friends of OPEC now being led by Russia. What Russia wants to see is the price of crude oil should not go up so high as to become attractive for those producing shale oil to be able to produce, glut the market, and rubbish everybody. So countries like Nigeria, like we said, need to adopt that system. Apart from OPEC advising Nigeria and Libya to be a bit disciplined, they need to look inwards. You know?
I was going to ask you that. What should Nigeria be looking ahead to now? Because there must be a replan with what we have on ground.
It is very clear that we are going to lose and have close to, like we said, $500 billion, which will have taken care of statutory transfers and probably sinking fund. But we just need to look inwards. There are so many ways. Let me tell you, if we decide effective tomorrow and we start internal refining, that on its own will bring down everything to almost ground zero in terms of positivity. The reason I keep giving a very simple example, between 1965 and 1989, the then generation of leaders were able to construct 4 refineries. In 1965, we had the first Port Harcourt refinery. 1978, we have the Warri refinery. 1980, we had Kaduna refinery. And 1989, we had the second Port Harcourt refinery. But from 1990 to now 2017, the current generation of leaders, regardless of whether they are military or civilian, regardless of their political affiliations, have not been able to construct one additional refinery and have not been able to maintain even the ones they inherited. Just imagine if we were to have refineries and we need to process internally. Then look at also what will have been happening to our gas. When we unbundled NEPA, the expectation was that we were going to use our abundant gas to drive turbines and generate electricity. We were also going to serve the entire West African coast with gas. We were even planning before to, from Nigeria, pump gas through North Africa, through the Mediterranean to Europe.
I'm sure all these dreams can still be considered.
They can be considered, but let's even start within the oil and gas industry. Let's look at non-oil revenues, do something about them. Then within the Nigerian oil and gas industry, let's still pass that PIB into law. If you don't have regulatory standards, nobody will come into your countries to contract.
All right.
But we just have to look internally and liberalize the oil and gas industry.
Energy analyst Bala Zakka, thank you for your analysis and